do that in this game. Like, how'd they do that? So I Googled around, how do you fly? I gotta fly in this game. And followed a few tutorials, and they said, okay, download this program, run this, change this byte, do that. And that was all reverse engineering. I didn't know it at the time. I just thought it was, flying in a game. So eventually I flew around in the screen, and it was really fun, and I loved it. It was addicting, and I had to get more of it. And that's what led to my career in security. There's so much crossover between video game hacking and the security industry in general. There's a lot of crossover between skill sets, such as things that you need to do when you're performing threat modeling, for instance. Achieving a goal and having an objective and working toward that goal in a very systematic way. There's also reverse engineering at play. And there's a lot of that with game hacking. There's also more specific network protocol analysis that has elements of reverse engineering as well. So that's all well and good. But then when you look at it, you're like, okay, so there's cheating, right? But then there's so much more to it, to video game hacking. In the video games in general, it's not just about cheating. You've got to look at the full stack of a system. I mean, there's the whole, there's the servers involved, there's the game clients, there's the network, there's customer service representatives who you call up, and then you get somebody, you figure out some information about a player. If you want their account and they're a high-level player, you want to take over their account. You could either attack the servers, or you could just call up customer service and say, hey, I'm that player. Give me their account information, use a little social engineering. So it's not all necessarily technical. And so analyzing the video game whole stack is a threat modeling exercise. Seeing what things an attacker, what assets an attacker can go after, and seeing how they would go after them. You've also got to identify those risks as well as any existing controls or protections that are in place, and identify maybe some gaps in the controls, see where you can help fill in those gaps to protect those assets that are important to your video game. There's also reverse engineering, taking apart the client. Maybe the server is available. Maybe it's an open source server that you can analyze. Sometimes this is the case. You can also analyze the network protocol itself and figure out how the client and the server interact with each other. So that's kind of an overview that applies to video games in general. And we're going to dive into the risks. The business risks are cyclical, let's say. If a video game gets hacked, it hits the news, and that's not good for a company. It causes brand tarnishment, which then leads to players not wanting to play the game because if you're not protecting your game, then there's a bunch of hackers running around, and then it loses its fun appeal. It's not as fun if everybody's ruining the game. So then if this happens repeatedly, then the customers will become disloyal. If let's say the intellectual property is stolen, the game content, the source code, let's say, to the server is stolen, your IP's ripped off, that's going to cause a loss of revenue. So there's a lot of things at play rather than just cheating. There's ways that attackers will target various games based off of these business models. So like freemium versus subscription versus one-time payment games where you only have to buy the game and then you can play it forever. So freemium models, the risks might be that you get to get the in-game items for free, the paid-only game benefits. A lot of them have pro features or premium items or whatever they are. And if you get those for free, then the freemium business model fails. Similar with subscription-based, if you can play the game without having to pay a subscription, you're going to lose money. And lastly, with one-time payments, a lot of times these types of games are blocked by DRM. So if you can bypass that, that'll lead to piracy. Well, there's a whole discussion about that, but piracy will happen, and then DRM plays a role in that. So let's dive into the technical aspects. So there's technical risks such as accounts getting hijacked or items in the game being stolen from other players. That's not a good thing. You want to protect against that. cheating, automation, botting. So let's say there's repetitive tasks that are done in the game in order to get progress throughout the levels of whatever the game is. If you can automate that, I used to do this. At least I'd boot up my program, and I'd go to bed, and in the morning I had just ranked up, 50 levels, and whereas all the other people were 50 levels behind because they had to actually sleep. So that's not something that you want to permit in your game, generally. Denial of service. If you can't play the game, that's a problem. Fraud in the virtual economy. Some games are pretty cool. They actually allow fraud to take place. It's part of the game, whereas most games don't like that. So more the realistic sim games, sometimes there will be situations where if one player lies and rips off or cheats or hacks their way into getting another player's currency, that's part of the game. Deal with it. But most of the time, that's not the case. And also, the game itself, like we said previously, piracy is something that most companies are going to want to avoid. So the risks as well, the business risks will vary by game genre. So a first-person shooter is going to have it's going to have crossover, but it's also going to have differing risks than, say, an online role-playing game. So bragging rights and competitive advantage are going to be huge goals of attackers playing a first-person shooter. They might do this by stat padding or creating aimbots or wall hacks so that they can see through walls and gain some advantage over other players as opposed to playing the game fairly. Whereas online role-playing games, you might, if there's a player that's invested 1,000 hours into a game account, and they've got the 3 level 100 whatever characters that are highly envied among the rest of the clans, somebody's going to want them. And they might actually try and hack into maybe a forum or something and then pivot from a web server into the internal network in order to compromise the game server so that they could get the account. Like, there's so many different ways we can do this. There's private servers where an attacker would avoid paying subscriptions. And then real-time strategy games, for those of you who have played, sometimes the maps don't have full visibility, and you can gain an advantage by seeing all of the players' movements and resources at a time, as opposed to a lot of the games where you have to send out scouts. And you have to constantly be monitoring, okay, do I have an up-to-date version of where my enemy is in the game's progression? If you see it all the time, that's a huge advantage to you. And then by platform. The gaming platform, console, mobile, Windows, Linux, Mac, web browsers, all that. You're going to see varying types of attacks against those, and you're going to see varying forms of protection against those. Say, with a web-based game, you're going to see a lot more server-side protection. Hopefully, you're going to see server-side protection in all the games, but you're going to see it valued a lot more by the developer of a web-based game, because the browser can be hacked. The browser, it's not even really a hack. You just make your own browser. Like, you can make it do whatever you want. You send the data that you want to send, and that's just how it is. Whereas game consoles, those require a much more specific skill set. And sometimes you've got to be able to desolder and manipulate bits and bytes as you perfectly time it, and there's a lot more to it. So they're going to focus their protections more on the client side itself, meaning the game console. They're going to rely on the protection in the console. Not always the case, but this tends to happen. Video game assets. So going back to the threat modeling example, or process, rather. We can have video game assets that are game content, the patches, the downloadable content, that sort of stuff. Player account information, billing information. That's always interesting. If you've got 5 million subscribers to your game, you've got 5 million people using some form of payment, which means 5 million targets to rip them off if you gained access to that billing information. So you want to protect that. There's fraud and cheat. The detection data itself that's telling you whether or not people are cheating. that could be an asset, because if you identify that, oh, there's this monitoring process that's sending back data saying, yeah, this person's cheating, if you just kill that process or you modify that data, even though you're cheating, that cheat data itself is invalid. So that's an asset. And we already mentioned customer service representatives or their accounts that you could compromise. So then we just discussed the things that attackers can target. These are some of the things you can use to protect those things that attackers would go after. So you can use encrypted protocols, such as VPN tunnels or anti-tampering mechanisms on the game client. This is very common. You can monitor for certain security events. You can say, hey, if a player is moving at 50 times the speed they're supposed to, then something's probably up. They're not supposed to be able to do that. You can do, and this is part of cheat and fraud analysis, you can also do IP whitelisting for certain applications if appropriate. A lot of times this will help curb attacks. So that's more of the technical risks. Getting into the attack and defense. So there's the silver bullet approach. That works. Not a lot. You want to rely on a layered approach. So there's relying on a single control that it's not going to, it might work in certain situations, but it's not going to work in the long run. You want to have, let's take, for example, if I'm going to protect using a layered protection approach, I'm going to protect premium items in a mobile game, say, that I shouldn't be able to get unless I'm submitting money through some payment method. Or maybe let's say it's a premium in-game item for a desktop. I shouldn't be able to reverse the client. You want to make it difficult for attackers to reverse the client that's used to make that, to use the premium item, say. So that way that I couldn't modify the client to say, hey, I'm using this upgraded item, even though I don't have the upgraded item. It wouldn't make sense if I could modify that. But let's say that you've got anti-tampering covered. You're good. Your game can't be reversed, which it always can, but let's say that it's really, really difficult. So then as an attacker, I'm going to go to the next layer down, which would be the network encryption, or the network layer. And I'm just going to send spoof packets. I'm not even going to use the game client. Avoid it entirely. So then if you make the network encrypted, it's going to be a lot more difficult than sending plain text traffic. As an attacker, I can sniff the wire and see the plain text just go right by and say, okay, I'm going to give myself unlimited whatever. And as a defender, if you encrypted that data, it would have been a lot harder for an attacker to sniff that and replicate it. Similarly, server-side checks are very useful for identifying. Let's say the game client says, I'm going to use a premium item and gain whatever effects you would gain. A simple server-side check to make sure that the person actually purchased that item is a quick fix for this. But that doesn't necessarily happen on games. People just assume, well, if I can send the data that says I'm using it, then I must have bought it. Not always the case. Taking the offensive approach, the offense, there's the general hacking process, like I said, of thinking of a goal, like getting unlimited health or gaining access to certain restricted parts of a map so that I can, or maybe performing powers and moves and whatever level 80 moves might be out there that I can not perform at lower levels. You know, if I'm a level 15 character and I'm performing stuff that's way out of my league, that should be a red flag. So that I would pick as a goal. And then I would plan out how I want to reach that goal. And going through the layers of security here. You can modify the game at runtime, the client, at runtime or on disk, depending on the protections in place. One might be easier than the other. Or find out how to send spoof network packets to the server, or look for server logic flaws in general. So then you execute the attack. But it's a very methodical approach, as opposed to just jumping in and seeing how do I hack it. So let's say there's this game, for those of you who are familiar with Ghost in the Shell code, they had a CTF in 2015, and it was called Pony Island, or Pwn Adventure 3. And so I'm going to use that as an example here for how to get unlimited ammo. Or just not the unlimited ammo quite yet, we'll get to that in the demo, but just in general, like how would I hack the game? So I would find out how to modify the client if I wanted to pursue one of these goals, like unlimited ammo. And I can use a game trainer that I can create, or I can find tools available that provide this functionality pretty easily. And this works because there's no anti-tampering mechanism. So if there was any obfuscation or any sort of encryption of the game client, or any form of protection, this wouldn't be as easy as it is. Or I could find out how to send spoofed network packets to the game server. You could proxy traffic. So let's assume that the client itself, the game client, was protected. It would be possible to proxy network traffic. So instead of saying the game connects to the end server, you would say the game actually connects to your proxy, which then sends it off to the server. And then you modify all the traffic in between. That way you get around that whole issue of the game client being protected. Or you can look for server-side flaws itself. Perhaps check to see whether or not the ammo count that you claim to have is what the server actually thinks you have. And if that check is not performed, then you've got a winning situation. In this case, there's one little flaw. If in the case of this game, the game server is released. It's already been released. So as an attacker, I can say, hey, I'm going to host this game. It's great. You come join it. I've got all the perks you want. And I just happen to give myself unlimited rights or whatever. And this would be the case for an administrative user. It would make sense. But sometimes there's other common games out there where you run your own client, and it's assumed, well, you can't hack the client. So, well, you can. So as somebody who's hosting a local LAN party, you have complete control of everything, and you can give yourself unlimited advantage, whereas your team members might be restricted by what the server itself is checking for, team and enemies. So gaining unlimited ammo in this game is simply performed by identifying where in memory is the ammunition stored. It's stored at that address that I'm not going to read off to you. And I have 29 ammo in my clip. Then I'm going to identify the instruction that points to that address, or that writes to that address, excuse me. So every time I pull the trigger, I fire a bullet, that ammo count goes down. So what's changing that ammo count? That address right there. It's a move instruction in assembly for those of you who are familiar with it. And then I take that, since I control the game client, or I control the server or whatever we're attacking here, I'm going to modify that so that instead of decrementing the ammo count, I'm just going to not do anything. I do a no-op, which is no operation. And so that's the byte 90 right there on the far right. That does nothing. So instead of doing something, which would be the decrement of the ammo count, I do absolutely nothing. And therefore, I gain unlimited ammo. That's how it works. So I'm going to show how that happens here. All right, so let's say right here, we see over here I've got 30 ammunition. And then I'm going to open up my game trainer here. This is available online, by the way, for those who want to find it. It's called Cheat Engine. It's pretty useful. So I'm going to search for that ammo count that I have, which was 30. So I perform the search, and it narrows it down for me to 87,000 addresses. Not really great for what I need. I'm going to need a little more specifics. So I switch back to the game client and fire a bullet. Goes to 29. So I search for 29. And then I perform a scan, and I see that only one address out of that previous list that all held the value 30 of addresses, I find now out of that list, there's only one at this point in time that has the value 29. So I know I've identified the ammo count. But I just want to make sure. So I'm going to change it to 20. And look, ammo count. Now it's 20. And I look over here, it's 16. I bump it up to 30, switch back, it's 30. So I've just modified the ammo count of this game. Pretty cool. The problem is, if I'm running around and shooting everybody and doing my thing, I'm not going to want to switch back and forth over and over and over and over. That's not going to be fun. It'd be better to just run around and actually find the ammo itself than to do that. So what I do is attach a debugger and say, okay, I'm going to set a hardware breakpoint on that address that says, okay, break the client, cause the client to just stop executing if that address has something written to it. So I do that, I fire a bullet, and I see that an address pops up. And that's that move instruction that we showed earlier. And it moves some data around, but basically that's what decreases the ammo. So what I do here is I open up my disassembler, and I say, I'm going to change that to the no operation that we previously discussed. And now, when I go back to the game client, now that there's a bunch of no operations, when I fire the bullet, or when I fire the gun, it doesn't actually decrease the ammo at all. So that's how a very, very simple unlimited ammo hack would be performed. Now, this is not taking into account anything like, what do you call it, server-side checks or anything like this. This is assuming that the server doesn't check anything like that. So, so here, I'm jumping around, showing you how high I can jump, how fast I can move. I got ADHD. I got to go faster than this. So I made some scripts because I can't wait. I'm not patient. I want to have moon jump, and I want to have super speed, and I want to have unlimited ammo. So now I can jump a little higher. That's by doing the same type of process. I can go a lot faster. I can run around, do all sorts of kind of things. But this is simply by modifying the game client. And this stuff isn't normally, possible. Now look at how fast that bear, it took forever to shoot the bear down. So I'm going to just bump up how much damage the rifle does, so that instead of having to stand there for a whole 2 seconds, I just fire one bullet and he's gone. It just makes my life a lot better. But the thing is, I haven't done this little check for what do you call it, health. So as I've got this game going, or excuse me, I'm showing you here. I got ahead of myself. So we've got a few of the guns and things in the game that I'm showing you here. At the bottom, we've got how much damage it normally does, and that's like 8, or B damage. Can't really tell. B damage. So the value B in hex is, I think, like 11 or something. And so instead of that, I bump it up to 1, 0, 0, 0, a whole bunch of zeros. So it's a lot more damage. And do that for all the guns, or a few of them. I think there's more in the game. As you can see there, oops, if I can go back a little bit. It showed that it did a lot of damage. And you can see that when I just fire a single bullet. You can also see that my health is at 999. It's because I've enabled this little modification where I've searched. You can see it kind of jumped down to 7, or 979. And then when another bear comes over, it goes down to 959 sometimes. That's because I have this health locked. So what I'm doing is like every 50 milliseconds, I'm resetting the value at that address to 999. So if I unset it, then you see my health go down real fast. I don't like that. So I freeze my health at a bit higher value. Yeah. So then take out the bears. But I don't, it's still kind of slow for me. I'm not happy with it being so slow, and I can only jump like as high as a tree. And that, to me, that's just kind of boring. I mean, it's not the greatest. So in this game, you can actually walk on water. That's not a hack. So I'm going to enable super moon jump and super speed, and then you can go a little bit higher. And these are just modifications. I mean, I'm doing some simple floating point modifications. You can find all this online at my GitHub, Carter Jones. And I've got a little cheat table thing that you can download and mess with. But basically, that's how you hack a game client. And assuming that the server side doesn't check this sort of stuff, you're free to fly around. And this is a tremendous advantage that players have. They can, I mean, I was able to jump out of the starting point. The starting point of the game is kind of like you're in a little cave. I can just jump out of it. No clip. I'm done. I don't have to do any of that, starter stuff. I can just run around and have fun. So that's the demo. And then going over to, if you noticed, when I did the unlimited health in this game, I had to freeze the value. If I had made it so that decrementing the health was impossible, using the same technique as the gun ammo, everyone in the game has unlimited health. And I actually tried this, and I got in an endless firefight with a bear. So that just doesn't do much for you. So in these situations, what you want to do is identify key addresses, and then identify patterns in memory that can reveal structures, such as the player structure, or the bear structure, or the whatever structure. And then identify certain offsets that you might see, such as their x-axis position, the y, the z, where in the map they are, and then how fast they're going. That's what the velocity might be, or the direction they're facing. There's a bunch of things that might be contained in a single player object, such as health, shields, and visibility. And instead of saying that I can't decrement the health, I would simply freeze that value for that one player. Because if I remove the ability to take damage, it would affect everyone. And I only want to be the one that gets unlimited health. So I would freeze my value at a preferred amount. Client-side protections will help out with this tremendously. So you guys saw how I very quickly, it was less than 5 minutes, and that was with me talking, how I did some simple hacks. If any of this code had been obfuscated, if any of it had been perhaps encrypted, or just a simple check to see, hey, is somebody debugging this? There's a Windows API call you can make, says, is debugger present? If it is, crash the client, send cheat reports, whatever. The game doesn't do that. And this can be, obfuscation can be applied to all parts of the game, or just portions of it that are critical. And it's sometimes there's some encryption that's applied to certain portions, but sometimes it's to the entire binary, and when the game loads, then the binary is decrypted at runtime, so that makes analysis based off of an image that's stored on disk very difficult. So oftentimes people will have to load the game, take a memory snapshot, and then perform analysis off of that. But if you're encrypting portions of the game and then decrypting them when you need to use them and then re-encrypting them, then that makes that sort of analysis even more difficult. So there's a lot of those sort of techniques people can use. Anti-debugging, like I mentioned, if it's enabled. Sometimes people want to allow the game to continue. I've heard of this. I heard a talk by one gentleman who said they identified who's making the game trainers, and then they'll say, okay, so that person's making a game trainer, and then they're releasing it, and other people are downloading the trainer and using it to hack. They'll ban all the people that use the trainers, but not the developer. So then they keep identifying who are the cheaters, and they just ban all those accounts. The developer's saying, it's not me, I'm not getting hacked, I don't know what's wrong with you guys. It's a little game that they'll do that. So you won't necessarily want to crash the executable. It's kind of how you want to play the game with hackers. And then there's runtime integrity checks. So you saw how I modified the code at runtime. if there had been something in the code to detect that change, something might fire off and it say, hey, this code was modified. Do you want to reset it to what it should be? Or do you want to flag it as cheating? Something like that. And then that's good for doing identifying some non-debugging based routines, write process memory, virtual alloc, that sort of things. So then there's network-based attacks. So let's say you've protected your game client. You've done a great job at that. Fantastic. I'm going to come in here and I'm going to proxy it. Okay, I'm not going to touch the client. That's easy. If this goes back to what we were saying earlier about if the network is plain text and all the traffic is plain text, it doesn't matter if your client is super protected. I can just falsify data and send it. Or you can modify the server traffic. Let's say for whatever reason I'm able to take apart a certain portion of the game client that has to do with like the game's decryption and encryption mechanisms for the traffic, the network traffic. I might be able to figure out how to do some sort of attacks that way, which is why it's good to obfuscate your clients. And these sort of things can be used to, like I mentioned, mention which mobs or enemies are on a map. Or sometimes you can identify, okay, there's 50 different enemies on the map, and sometimes they call it grinding, and you'll try and kill all the little enemies on the map in order to look for the one that has the super awesome item that you're looking for. But if you have a network client and server where the server sends you all the data in advance, and technically your client knows which of the enemies has the awesome item. If you just modify or you make a proxying tool that can identify that, and it points it out to you. I've seen this on a friend of mine had the game client and then a second monitor with the map viewer, and it said, okay, that's where the special item is. He just ran over, killed that one enemy, took the super item, and then was on his way. And it was really simple, and it's because the client gets all the information it needs. It just doesn't show it. It's not visible. Then there's speed and teleport hacks. If you say, hey, server, I'm actually over there, 100 miles that way. I know I was right 100 miles back here a minute ago, or actually a second ago, but I'm there now. And the servers say, okay, cool, you're there now. So you just teleport it over there. It's real simple. Sometimes it's a bit involved. Cool, thanks. So then if you wanted to go the super extreme method, you could just exploit the server. If you found a way to identify a vulnerability in the server itself, you could get remote code execution, take over the server. That's a bit more in depth, and it certainly is an attack that certain attackers will pursue. Because because of all the business risks that we mentioned earlier, sometimes cheating isn't an attacker's main goal. Sometimes it's denial of service to cause the company to go down for a certain number of days, which causes profit loss, which causes all that sort of stuff. And an attacker might be financially backed by some other party that wants to see that company hurt. So they'll do that, something like a remote targeting logic vulnerabilities or implementation vulnerabilities, flaws and bugs. So there's server-side protections you can do to combat some of these things. So only sending data that the client needs to know. This has happened as well with map information sometimes. You can send the data about the enemies. If you're farming or you're grinding, you need to find out which enemy has the special item. Well, if you only know about the enemies what they have inside of them once you've killed them or done whatever you're supposed to do, at that moment, that's gonna reduce that sort of sniping sort of approach of just killing the one enemy that you need to kill. You also need to consider all data from the client is potentially malicious. This is the case with any client-server interaction. Doesn't matter if it's video games or whatever, a website, anything. And so you want to take that into careful consideration in your architecture. You want to also compare data received from the client to an acceptable range of expected data. So like I was saying with teleportation, or saying that I have a premium item and trying to use a premium item when I actually don't have it. Making sure that that's in an acceptable range of possibilities. And if that causes too much of a performance hit, you can just do a random sampling. Yeah, it's not going to catch everything, but it might catch repeat offenders. And that's sometimes better than nothing. So, stepping back from video games specifically, this applies to a lot of industries that are interested in similar security concepts. A lot of overlap, in fact, with media and entertainment industries. So, let's say financial institutions, these same principles apply to banking websites or stock trading applications or ATM transactions. These sort of things can be applied, these same attacks can be applied. So for ATM transactions, who's to say that I don't just split that cable that hooks the Ethernet cable into the router? Who's to say I don't just like set up some sort of device on that cable, or split it and then reconnect it to my device, and then I'm intercepting everything. If there's no secure transfer of data, then the attacker just scored. Similar with stock trading or bank website, whatever. Similar also with media and entertainment, as I mentioned. Video streaming restriction bypass. If the DRM is not enforced, then people can get what you're offering, your streaming services, for free. Copyright protection of physical media. The list goes on. These are just very few examples as to where these types of attacks can also apply outside of the video game industry. So in conclusion, video game security is not just about preventing cheating. It also varies by businesses and business type and technical risks, by genre, platform, etc. Some of the risks are unique to the industry and some aren't. So there's crossover. Layered defenses are very, very important, because if I can find a weakness in any layer, then I've won. And like we were saying earlier, both attack and defense processes apply to more than just the video game industry. So, are there any questions?
Question?
We've got one in the back here.
Is it on? Hi. So in addition to some of the techniques you described for the companies, the video game companies, to detect cheating, have you ever talked to any of them about participating in bug bounties?
Yeah, that's definitely one approach a lot of companies take. And it can be effective to a certain degree. It just depends on what the company's goal is. Bug bounties can certainly find a lot of the more low-hanging fruit if you have a few skilled attackers in the audience that really understand a game. We've seen it where participants will actually understand the game a bit more than the developers themselves. And that's great to get an outsider's perspective on the game. I've also noticed that with bug bounties in particular, the community around it seems to respect the company a bit more. When they say, hey, we're trying to secure our product, help us help you. And so that generally increases the company's reputation among their clients, the people that are buying their services and games. So yeah, it's usually pretty beneficial. Yeah.
Do you find that game companies are actually receptive to actually patching security flaws as opposed to regular software and banking organizations?
See, that's going to vary by company as well.
Right. Well, I know Blizzard and Riot and those big names, they care about security, but most game companies actually don't care about security.
I mean, it just depends on how much money you're making.
Right.
Okay. Like, do you have the ability? It always comes down to a business decision. Is there a business justification for fixing these security risks? Because if there isn't, if I'm going to spend $10 million on fixing a risk that's going to lose me only $500,000, why am I going to do that? Sometimes it's an accepted risk. So yeah, it really depends on the company. It really depends on their income stream and their upper management kind of understanding or not understanding, but their upper management prioritization of risk. So yeah, it'll vary.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Looks like we have about a minute left.
What was that side scroller you had?
So I don't know if I'm able to say, but if you come talk to me afterward, I'd be happy to share. It was really fun. It got me started on it. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Is Cheat Engine illegal?
Yes.
No. I specifically picked this game. Cheat Engine is a tool. It's a tool to do reverse engineering, a lot of memory modification, reading, writing, scanning, that sort of stuff. The tool is not illegal. What I did is also not illegal. It is a game designed to be hacked. It was part of a capture the flag game. Instead of just having a vulnerable website, they decided let's make a vulnerable game. So I was demonstrating off of that. Yeah. But if you're going around and hacking without a company's permission, yeah, I guess that could be considered illegal or just a breach of the EULA. It just kind of depends. Yeah, I'm not a lawyer. Any other questions? Cool. Thank you so much.